Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Sunday Speaker Series online. I am Pamela Morales, the Communications Officer for the Museum of South Texas History, and today's presentation is going to be a great one. If you notice, there are several panelists, guest speakers today. Francisco Guajardo will be, the museum CEO, will be moderating this presentation, and it is about ranching recuerdos. So all of our guest speakers, our presenters have lived, grew up on a ranch here in South Texas. So they're going to tell us all the fun stories about growing up on the ranch. So I'm very excited for this. I know some of you are very excited for this as well. So without further ado, Francisco, if you'd like to go ahead and start the presentation.
Okay, thank you, Pamela. Appreciate that. So before we kick this off with our guests, who have, I think, each one a treasure trove of stories here on recuerdos of growing up on the ranch. Before we kick this off, I do want to say a couple things here. Number one, thank you very much to the community of followers of the Museum of South Texas History. We are very grateful that that you're hanging in there with us during the pandemic. We have seen that during this time of 2020, it's been a very trying time for a lot of us, for the community as well. But you've been steadfast really in paying attention to history, paying attention to culture, paying attention, to the museum and our programming. And so we're very thankful for that. We really appreciate that. There's a note here to be made about the Sunday Speaker Series. That's what we're on now. The Sunday Speaker Series at the museum has a long history. There is evidence that the museum was doing the Sunday Speaker Series back in the 70s, when people like Hubert Miller, a professor at the university, used to come to the museum and to give talks. And through the 80s, it continued. And then through the 90s and into the 21st century, and in the last 5, 6, 7 years, it has really become stronger. And so now we do more than, twice a month often. And during the pandemic, especially, we have really stepped it up because there's great content really to share about South Texas history. And so we're happy to do this one today with 3 great storytellers. And so what we have here today is Lilia Garcia. She will introduce herself shortly. So Lilia, just kind of give a hello to your friends. And so we have Melissa Guerra, who is Melissa Mcallen Guerra. So there's Melissa. Welcome to you, Melissa. And then we have Mr. Munoz, Jesus Chuy Munoz. Mr. Munoz, just wave your hand to your fan base, because we know you have a fan base, Mr. Munoz. So here's the thing about today's topic and talk. We know that South Texas and the history of La Frontera and the borderland is a very complex history. And so it is rich with so much, rich with, family histories, rich with turmoil, along the border, going back to even the time before the Spanish came. The river and the border has always been contested land. But we also know that for the complexity of South Texas, that there's been this kind of persistent identity. And so the identity of South Texas really has been one of, ranch life. And that's been, even during the time when the agricultural forces of the late 1800s and into the early 1900s, when the agricultural forces would emerge as very dominant, pushing back against the ranching forces and that sort of thing. Even with that, ranching culture and the identity of ranching continued to be predominant. And so as we sit here in the year 2020, one could argue, no, it was a king ranch. That was like a 19th century thing. Actually, not so much. Nope, was the Mcallen? Well, no, not so much. The Iturria, actually, these ranches are very historical in South Texas, and they continue to have a level of gravitas in the identity of South Texas. And so with that as a backdrop, we wanted to have a session today on recuerdos. So people who grow up in the ranch or people who live on the ranch, we wanted to invite them to share some stories about those kinds of lived experiences. So we're going to start here with Melissa. And Melissa, the reason we're going to start with you is because, so I sit here as the CEO of the Museum of South Texas History. And part of the reason that I can do that is because of your grandmother and because of your father and because of a lot of other people, to be sure. But your grandmother was the one who actually spearheaded in the 1960s the idea of creating an archive, the idea of creating a museum. And so I want to honor your grandmother, but also the rest of the family by saying, Melissa, how about if you be the first storyteller here? And do that by telling us who you are and how it is that you're connected to this ranch legacy in South Texas.
Well, that's very kind. Thank you, Francisco. Yeah, my name is Melissa Mcallen Guerra, and I was born. I was born in Mcallen, and but then we've lived our entire life on the ranch, and on Mcallen Ranch, which is north of Edinburgh, it's between Raymondville and San Isidro. And actually, I want to touch on something before we get too far away from it. What Francisco was saying was, yes, my grandmother was one of the women that spearheaded the foundation of the Museum of South Texas History, but there were other women as well. And my dad remembers that it was a bunch of ladies wearing sneakers and getting together and having meetings. And, I don't have this information firsthand, but knowing my grandmother, I think that it really pained her that the original Edinburgh court, the Hidalgo County Courthouse, was torn down on the square. It was a beautiful building, but I know that it had like flooding problems. The basement would always get flooded. And so they tore it down. And just coming from this lineage of people that never throw anything away or never tear anything down, I think she was really horrified that was, the moment where, the Hidalgo County Courthouse was then gone. So all of these little old ladies wearing sneakers would then get together at the jail that they were going to tear down. Now there must have been, they were probably like, wow, is a jail really like the best place to have a historical museum? But it was really the only historical building that was left on the square. So that's what they saved. And I remember she would pick me up from school because I went to St. Joseph's Catholic School with your wife, Francisco. We spent 8 years together in grade school, but she would pick me up in her big, I think she had a Lincoln Continental, which was a huge car. But anyway, she would pick me up and we would go and spend the rest of our afternoons from 3:30 to about 5:30 at the museum. And I got to run, and when I say the museum, it's the old jail part very specifically. And so I would get to run up and down those cast iron stairs that are in the back stairwell. And there was I don't even know the exact name of it. It's there was an iron bed that they would take from ranch to ranch whenever it was time for someone to pass away, and there needed to be a place to lay out the body. Well, this table, it went ranch to ranch, like I said, but at some point it was donated to the museum, and it existed for probably about 5 years under that cast iron stairwell. And that was better than a scary movie. Every time I got out of school, I would go sit under the stairwell looking at that bed and kind of freaking out very quietly. And then when you would turn the corner into the next room, then there was a pipe organ and a mannequin that was missing her hands too. So the whole afternoon was usually spent with me very wide-eyed. But I kept going back. I mean, it was always very interesting. So anyway, that's my little bit of history on the museum. But yeah, I did grow up on Mcallen Ranch, and I only live about 5 miles from there. So we spent a lot of time on the road going back and forth to Edinburgh. And, if I was to speak about memories of the ranch, it's not even a memory. It's still kind of the way things are today. We're isolated. We're kind of our own little community. we all get to know each other. And, you know, before we started this session, and we were speaking to Lilia, one of the other speakers, and we have our community, but we're also very isolated. And so we speak about these other satellite communities, which are the other ranches. And because we're, you know, we spend a lot of time around the table, a lot of time chatting, and you speak about families and relationships and, you know, how you are related. And it's very particularly South Texas. Francisco, you said something the other day that was really interesting, that you, what was it, Cabeza de Vaca was commenting on the families and this close tie of families that he saw among the Carancua, that Cabeza de Vaca commented that he had never seen any group, any tribal group ever care so much about their family and their children. And I really picked up my ears with that, because that's still the case in the you know, out here in the ranch lands. You know, our families come first, and even our extended families, like the family of Mr. Munoz or Lilia's family, like they're, you know, they're part of our family. They're just part of our heritage. And so even though you may not have met somebody, you already kind of know them. So Francisco, what specific questions do you have?
Well, here's one, Melissa. First of all, the Cabeza de Vaca quote, I'll pull it up in a bit just so that the community can see what it is that you're referencing, because up in the galleries in the River Frontier Gallery, we actually featured that one excerpt from Cabeza de Vaca's La Relación, you know, his travel journal that he published in 1542, like, you know, 10 to 15 years after he had traversed through what we know of today as South Texas. So I'll pull it up in a bit, but this is the question that I have for you now as you do your first introduction. So there's somebody named Cynthia who's chimed in, Cynthia Vidaurri Silva, who says that this is great listening. She says, love hearing about South Texas ranches. And then she says that her family owns a ranch that's been in the family since 1750. 1750 in Zapata County. So imagínate, Melissa, imagínate. 1750, like this became a country in 1776. There was a war, the French and Indian War, like from, you know, in the 1760s. 1750, there was already, like, you know, established life here. Never mind that. You referenced Carancua. You know, there are so many tribal First Peoples communities down here that had long and established, you know, settlements or people who lived as hunter-gatherers. This is a long chronicle in this region. But you actually point to like 8 generations back.
Yeah, there's my sister who wrote the book, I'd Rather Sleep in Texas, Mary Margaret Mcallen. There's like a missing link in the generations. We think it goes further back, but you can only prove up to about 8. But yeah, when you go all the way back to, I think she has documentation from like 1743, because you would apply for the land grant, and then it wouldn't get granted until much later. And so I'm a little fuzzy on whether it was 1743 or 1756 when the grant was originally applied for, but then it wasn't granted until 1791. So paperwork apparently has not changed. Bureaucracy is just as annoying as it is present day, as, you know, back then. So it's been, you know, but yeah, there was, yeah, so the existence of South Texas, of people being here, predates the existence of the United States, but the people that were here were functioning under the idea that this was Nueva España. So, you know, they were going under, you know, Spanish law, and they were just kind of an outpost. So I don't even think it occurred to them that something like the US would have popped up. So they were just, you know, business as usual. We're in Spain, but we're not, sort of thing. yeah, and the funny thing to me, Francisco, is like you think, oh, here's this one family, like the Garcia Vidauri, like that they've been here forever. And it's, I always thought, well, our family has this very unique heritage. We've only been here. I mean, we've been here since a very, very long time. But then once my kids got into school, and we kind of formed this little carpool group, and I would talk to my friends within this carpool group, they had the same history. Their families had all been here since the 1700s, you know, and they were like de la Garza or, you know, Guerra. Oh, there's so many guerras. Oh my gosh, there's so many guerras. And, you know, they all had very, very similar stories. And so it's this, we are just so firmly rooted in this land. We never, even if we physically leave, like Lilia was saying that she lived in New York and she lived in London, but she came back. We all seem to come back because we, or even if we don't, like it's just part of us. This is who we are. It's a very, very strong affiliation that you always have with the land and the culture and the family and the people, and that just stays with you.
So there is, Melissa, this thing about families that have been here for a long time on both sides of the border. On both sides of the border, so that, you know, in some ways, the Rio Grande, it has been very arbitrary in terms of the movement of people. I mean, in the last couple generations, it's been much more formidable in shaping, you know, the movement. But for centuries before, people just moved about.
Yeah, I was trying to get my husband to sit in on this talk, but I don't know if you noticed, he just snuck out the back door here. He's going back to his studio to go work on something. Yeah, his family ranched on the south side of the border near Reynosa, and my family ranched on the north side of the border. But his family has been here just as long. I mean, the Guerras have been here for a very long time. If you've ever been to Rio Grande City, there's the Manuel Guerra store, you know, and, you know, I had a retail store for a long time, and I'd have customers come in and like, inevitably they would be like, are you Guerra? Yes. Are you from like Roma, Miguel, Miguel Alemán? Yeah. Primos. Every time. Like, and there were just so many of them. But yeah, the river, I mean, obviously the river wasn't always the international boundary. You know, we live at the southernmost point of the Nueces Strip. So that was contested until 1845. So that was pretty late, like in terms of world history. So yeah, I mean, you know, for us as modern thinkers, with walls being built and people not being allowed to cross the border, we think that the border was always a very, you know, solid manifestation of law. And it never really was until maybe 25 years ago. And I'm saying that as my husband grew up in Reynosa and he went to Mac High. So, you know, you would just go back and forth. And that was the way to, still some people go, you know, they brave the line and just go shopping back and forth. There's certainly traffic both ways for shopping. I don't have time for the line. Man, that is a long line. But yeah, it's still, even to this day, doesn't really stop the culture and the interchange between the US and Mexico. Like the culture really exists on both sides.
Melissa, I'm going to show the quote that you referenced that I talked about the other day. So I'm sharing my screen here. And so, you know, some time ago, we were doing a program, and I just grabbed these two people who were visiting the museum. And so Pam snuck a photograph in, but here in the back behind me and a couple of guests about Los Antiguos Pobladores, the ancient peoples, it says, this is from Cabeza de Vaca's quote. So you might see Cabeza de Vaca here, Spanish castaway en relación. He said, he wrote this. This is in the 1500s when he's writing this. He says, these Indian people love their offspring the most of any in the world and treat them with greatest mildness. To me, that kind of encapsulates the whole spirit and energy, you know, of what it means to be from South Texas y de la frontera. Mr. Muñoz, I'm going to go to you next because un primo de usted, Mr. Muñoz, lo está saludando. And I want you to speak to not only your story, but who is this primo of yours? Un Elias Lozano Jr. que dice, hey, primo Chuy, I am here. So your primo is watching, Mr. Muñoz. Who is your primo? And then tell us who you are.
Okay, my primo that's talking right now is from, he actually lives close to Washington, D.C. I think I don't know if he still works with Washington, D.C., but that's where he's actually from Corpus. He was born in Robstown, lived in Corpus, and his family still lives in Robstown. But I know who he is. Yes. Okay. Hello, how are you? Okay, my name is Jesus Muñoz. I was actually born in Kingsville, Texas, which was and is still part of the King Ranch. But I was raised in the King Ranch. When mom used to have, I was the oldest one in the family. When she got ready for us to be born, my dad would rent a small place in Kingsville, and then she would move to Kingsville so she could have us, and then then we would move back to the ranch because that's where my dad worked. My dad used to work in a ranch in the King Ranch. It still exists. It's only 2 miles west from Rivera. It's called Santa Cruz. And my uncle, for I think the whole life of the existence of humans there, Nazario Muñoz, my dad's oldest brother, he was the one that was the caporal of the rancho, or foreman, whatever you want to call it, all his life until when he retired, the ranch was no longer had any humans working there. And that's where I was raised. And then as I grew up and we had to go to school, and my dad bought a little house in Rivera and started school there. That's another story that I might hit a little bit later. But anyway, that was our life. Our life was not, and I want to make sure that anybody that doesn't know who I am, and just for the first time, is hearing about the King Ranch. The King Ranch was the largest, most powerful ranch in the world at certain times in the past. It was actually the first section that the king bought was called the Rincón of Santa Gertrudis, which is where still the headquarters of the King Ranch is. And it's only 3 miles west of Kingsville. It's a very historical for anybody that's interested in history. There's a lot of history there, incredible history. Us, we were not. In no way was I connected with the owners or anything of the family. We were plain workers. My family was part of what made a lot of these ranches throughout Texas what they are now or what they were at one time. They were the workers that did the work, took care of the ranches. My family, the Muñoz family, possibly started, which was my great-grandfathers, started working for the King Ranch or around the King Ranch approximately around 1880. But in my grandmother's side, they started working for the King Ranch, or her father, possibly around 1855, around there. And I think she was from the first family that King invited to move to the ranch so they could help them learn how to work the cattle, how to take care of the cattle. Okay, this is who I am, and I am married. I've been married with my wife for 50, I'm going to be 60 years. This coming years, God gave me life. And I'm here, and first I want to thank God because there are very few of us left of this age. I'm 88 years old now. And I will talk about more of who I am a little bit later.
Well, Mr. Munoz, I want to say, thank you at so many different levels. First of all, thank you for your service, because after you grew up on the King Ranch in Rivera, then you went to the Korean War. So you're a Korean War veteran. Is that true?
That's correct.
And then you served your country for a number of years as well. So, thank you for that. Thank you also, for hanging in there, as productive as you've been all these years. I mean, you have not slowed down, because I've seen you at a number of public events through the years and even in the last 4 or 5 years. So thank you for not slowing down as well. Le quiero decir también, Mr. Muñoz, que muchos saludos les manda Miguel Muñoz, un primo de California. So he says hello. Elena Lozano also says, I'm here. She wants to be counted. So you apparently have a fan club all over the country.
Well, can I say a little bit about that?
Yes, of course.
For 30 years, I've been working on my family tree. I'm probably one, or maybe the one that has done more research in our family. And going back to what Melissa was saying a while ago, about the Guerras, I am from the Guerra family.
Pues que somos primos entonces.
Probablemente, no sé. My grandmother was a Guerra. Her father was Jesus Guerra. And they all came from Mier, across from...
No, de veras somos primos.
So, and Josas and all them. So I have, now that I have done the DNA and have worked in my family tree, I have found now that I have approximately, that's what the computer tells me, around 150,000 DNA connected.
Wow.
So the whole valley is my families that I have all over.
Well,
So,
but when you say that, Mr. Munoz, and we just showed this quote from Cabeza de Vaca, there's something that's particular about this region and how, family so shapes us in every single way. I mean, I'm holding in my hand something that you gave the museum. So this is a folder you gave us, a 75-page genealogy document. I'm holding in my other hand now this book that Melissa mentioned, where her sister and her father and her grandmother posthumously published this very impressive book on South Texas and the Mcallen family ranch. There's something here. And so I'm going to use this, Mr. Munoz, as kind of a transition to get to Lilia. There's something about why it is that you were inspired to investigate, who am I? Where is my family from? ¿Quiénes somos nosotros? Lilia, who are you and how do you connect to this?
How do I connect to this? Hello, everybody, and thank you, Francisco, and the museum, and everybody watching. Thank you for listening to us. All of us really have had a really special experience down here in South Texas. And in all the places that I've lived, in all the places that I've been to, it's a very weird thing that I find, that it's, you say Texas, but then if you say South Texas, there's a certain kind of ranch life and a world that everybody just kind of understands. I could even talk about all these funny things where there's even a South Texas way of speaking. One of my very good friends who lives up in Napa, California, we would always say, we're getting down from the car, because in Spanish, me voy a bajar del carro. And I'm getting down and I'm getting down. And when I went off to college and she went off to college, it was this big joke, because it was, getting down, are you, dancing, getting down? And I was like, no, isn't that what you say? But you realize it's a South Texas weird little thing that we all grew up. And I always say I'm really, really lucky, because I got to grow up and have the best of a ranch life, but also experience the city life and get the best of the city worlds. I am a descendant of Francisco Ituria, who is kind of new, because y'all are talking about 1700s and everything. Well, Francisco really doesn't get into the scene really until the mid 1800s. And he's a contemporary of Richard King of the King Ranch and Kennedy, and is all part of that kind of stuff that made the Valley very unique and special, especially during the Civil War. But I grew up on his ranch lands. I was the oldest grandchild of our branch of my grandfather, Martin y Tino Garcia. And I grew up, you know, looking at all the ranch lands and kind of like Melissa, like you grow up and you know, they're not really memories because they're still part of your life. They still happen. They're still there. And one of the things that Melissa also said that I went, oh, I know that, it's the driving, always driving to what, you know, Brownsville or Edinburgh. For us, we're kind of equidistant to Edinburgh and Brownsville. And so it was like always driving to school, driving, you know, why couldn't I go to a party? Because we have to drive back to the ranch, you know, like stuff like that. But you realize that it's part of this unique experience of growing up in South Texas. I mean, I remember walking the lands with my grandfather and you know, and he would be telling me things and I was admiring Mr. Munoz's hat because I remember my grandfather wearing that style of hat. And growing up on the ranch lands, it is such a unique experience that you don't even know it has made you who you are, because here I am, you know, living in different parts of the world, and now I'm back. But cowboy boots, hats, the stuff that I grew up with that were just part of who I was is part of who you are always. And I mean, I remember being very little and when you're young and, you know, kids are putting posters or whatever on the doors and the rooms of who they love or who they want to be or whatever. I had posters of John Wayne. I had every intention of marrying John Wayne. He unfortunately died when I was very young, but that was who I personified with, because that's how I knew. I understood his movies because that's what we kind of lived. Granted, it was Hollywood and all that, but I mean, South Texas was just part of who I was. And it's, you grow up on the ranch lands, your friends are the people that are living on that ranch with you. The workers that were they had their own families and their own lives, but they were also our family and our lives, because we would have birthday parties and everybody would be all together because that's what we knew. You're isolated by yourself. You know, you learn also to be really independent, to do things on your own. And all of that is part of that South Texas ranch experience, being able to speak Spanish and English, interchanging it, not pocho, I'm not saying pocho, but I'm just saying, just speaking good Spanish and good English, but mixing it and understanding things and understanding the culture perhaps more than understanding, how shall I say it? You understand the dynamics, even without knowing you do. I actually was trained initially right out of college as a cross-cultural trainer. And this was before I got my master's in history and everything and went off and did other things. But one of the things that I always was amazed was growing up in this wonderful South Texas ranch lands, you learned how to just do different cultures without having to have training, because you just learned how to differentiate and how to talk to people and how to understand the dynamics. And you understood, well, we had some wonderful old cowboys on our ranch that we called Don Nicolas, because he deserved the Don. He was a great old cowboy. And yet you learned that you just learned how to be humble growing up on the ranch lands. I don't know how to sense that. You just learned that you're surrounded by nature, you're surrounded and isolated, and you just, not everything is going to be given to you quickly. You know, it doesn't rain in South Texas sometimes. And in fact, we were the other day, you know, I sounded like an old farm worker going, gosh, the ground's getting really dusty again. We need some good rains, you know, and you learn that there's other things around you, you know. As a little kid, you see calves die, you know, you see animals die, and you just learn, okay, this is life. This is the circle of life. So all of that, I guess, is kind of my experience with the ranch lands. Everything from loving John Wayne to wearing cowboy boots while I'm working at Christie's in New York. I mean, it's all part of who I am. But at the same time, it's all something that I share with these two wonderful panelists and with everybody else that has grown up in the ranchlands in South Texas. When you see those mesquite trees, when you see this kind of low-lying brush, when you hear people are out hunting and you go, oh, really? What did you shoot? And the Nelga, I mean, everything, the stories of the King Ranch, the stories of Francisco Iturria, the stories of the Mcallen Ranch. I mean, I ended up studying history and getting my graduate degrees in history and becoming a lecturer for history because of those stories and because of my love for the ranch lands. So, that's who I am.
Lilia, you say that you learned or you almost like imbibed humility, you know, just by being out in the ranch. So it's a question that I'm going to pose to the three of you. So I want Mr. Munoz and Melissa to be thinking about if one of those qualities, virtues, is humility, what's another one that you learned, Mr. Munoz and Melissa? Y tú también, Lilia, you get another shot at this. What's the one virtue that you learned by growing up in the ranch? And then tell me a story about that one virtue. You know, whatever it is. Maybe it's, you know, it is about humility. Maybe it's patience. You talk about those long drives. Maybe it's being resilient. Maybe I don't know what it might be. But Melissa, you get the first shot at this. What is that one virtue, Melissa, that is so connected to you growing up in El Rancho that you got a story too?
There's different ways to verbalize what this virtue is. One would be being thrifty or economical or ecological or codicia, just plain old stinginess. But you know, any resource that you waste means another trip to town.
Yeah.
So, you know, if you have a little bar of soap, you use that soap until it does not exist anymore. Or if you have a broken pot or a plate, like it gets put into the garden, you know, you don't just go throw it in the garbage, wait for somebody to take it away and then go buy something else. You know, what you have, that's what you use. And my grandmother never threw anything away. And now we have this concept of being a hoarder, which she was very close. But you know, you could use it at a different time. You know, old towels, you don't throw them away because you may have a dog or a calf or something that you have to take care of. And so you keep them on hand. Old sheets, you know, you may need them for you know, the garden if it freezes, or you know, but there was at no point because we don't have trash collection out here in the country. You have to deal with your own trash. So you have I think you have a very different relationship with material goods, because if they can be used in a different way, kitchen scraps, composting, like, because you manage all of your material stuff, it doesn't just go away. You reuse it. So let me see if I can think of a story. Well, I guess the best story, this isn't much of a story, but we have a lot of animals. And so, and I cook a lot. And so my animals are just as well fed as I am. There's always something for them. But you know, we don't throw anything away if somebody else could use it. And I don't know if that's the experience with the other panelists.
Well, let me, Melissa, let me follow up on this, because, you know, I happen to know, as many people know, that you have developed a level of expertise in the culinary arts. And what I've seen of you, you know, even back when you had your restaurant here in Edinburgh, and then watching you, you know, on TV and do shows online, that there's something about the simplicity of food and ingredients that you use, because you do not present in these extravagant, but you present in very almost like frugal and economical ways you present your food.
That's how, yeah, but it's the essence of who we are. Like we don't have a French cuisine. I like lecturing on cuisine and I, you know, just like Lilia, I get to go talk to other people about history, but mine's always food history because food is a great democracy. And you know, when you come to the table, everybody has to take their hat off and sit down and behave. You know, everybody has to, you leave all the arguments to the side and everybody has to get along. That's what I really like about food, because that's where it was always the platform for culture and information, otherwise known as gossip. You know, it was the place where the plática would happen, was at the table. And so, and the backdrop for that was always food. But, you know, there's the recipes like tortilla dulce, you know, the little gorditas de harina. It's all very frugal, and it's all pantry staples, you know, dulce de frijol. You know, you used anything that you had on hand, and it's just, it's so, and this doesn't sound endearing. It's so endearing, it's charming, but with a lot of respect. Because once you get out in the ranch lands, you look around and you're like, how did anybody do this? This is, I don't even like being out of my truck without the air conditioning. Like, I have to take water with me. How did anybody do that? How did anybody do that? But you could look at it in a negative way and say, well, people out there, they're just very cheap. But no, but they're not only are they being frugal and they're conserving their resources, but they're also, it's a deep caring about the land. You don't just throw stuff out, you know, like, this is your land. This is who you are. You don't just trash it. So yeah, I need to come up with a better word, and I need to write it down and remember it, but it's a real cross between being highly ecological and super todo. And maybe that is why, you know, there's the Caesar Clayburgh wildlife, I'm going to miss it all up, but where they are into wildlife preservation. You know, I mean, the King Ranch has taken great strides and made a great effort in wildlife preservation. And I think that's, you can see that, you know, around Raymondville and all parts of South Texas, that it's a theme that's kind of ongoing. We want to see more wildlife. We want to see the land preserved and to be pristine. And it does kind of go back to this economical, ecological focus that's part of our ranch culture. Lilia, what do you think?
I totally agree. In fact, I was just thinking of how my mom, before the buzzwords of environment and protection, I mean, I remember my mother, my grandparents, I mean, it was always like protection of certain types of plants, certain types of things because of the animals, because of this, because of that. And it was all just kind of, I don't know, I call it just a simple love of the land. It's just a love of the land. And I'm a cultural historian, so I'll reference a lot of movies, but I remember seeing Gone with the Wind when I was really little, and you have Scarlett O'Hara saying, "Oh, Daddy, don't talk about the land," and she's over there being frivolous. And she said, that love of the land will come to you. And at the very end, you realize, you know, you watch the movie, the love of the land, the love of living on that land. And I think in South Texas, and as you were mentioning, you know, the Karankawas and it going through the years, and at whether you're the owner of the land, longtime hard workers, and I agree with Mr. Munoz. I look back and I see all the hard work that so many of our cowboys were doing. And I remember being the little girl, like, oh, I get to go on a cattle drive, and I was all dressed up and ready to go. But you see the hard work of cowboys, and it's hard work to live out there. I mean, you know, you don't have things delivered. I still have things like, you know, Amazon Prime will not deliver to us during this pandemic. We have to go into town, but you realize that there's just a love for the land at whatever level, at however we experience it. There is a love for the beauty of South Texas and that ranch lands. And And you see that in a way, it's resourcefulness, it's pragmatism. It's all of a sudden it kicks into you that you're willing to fight for this land more than you would your own life. It's your land, and it doesn't mean that you own it. It just means that it's in your heart. It's part of who you are, and we are so special to be in this area because there's so many unique things here that I think, you know, when you grow up and you're little, and like when I was in high school, I'd be in Brownsville, and there was little things that I didn't get to experience certain things because I wasn't living in the city. I was living at the ranch. And when you're little, you don't perhaps understand that. But the moment I got on that horse then on Saturdays, and I was out there pretending I was one of the cowboys, not really, but working, you know, there was such a sense of accomplishment. The day when you go to bed, you feel you've done something. Something happened today. And I think for me, my dad is an Aggie, and A&M is very good now in football, but for a while there, they were really bad. And somehow for me, A&M, because it was the agricultural school, and always having hope for tomorrow, like the rain we were talking about, it hasn't rained in the ranch lands for a while. It's getting kind of dry. One thing that I found that all the ranchers and cowboys and workers, they're pragmatists, they are resourceful, they deal with problems head on. There's a sense of humility, but there's always a sense of hope. Tomorrow really is another day. You know what? Tomorrow we'll figure it out. The cows just busted a pipe. We've got to go out there, fix it. Maybe it's in the middle of the night, but you know what? Tomorrow's going to get up. We're going to get up and we're going to do it all over again, and it's going to be okay. That's what I get from the ranch hands. Mr. Munoz, you've been on there hands-on, probably much more than me. I pretended I was when I was, but I'm sure you have that same experience of just tomorrow, you know, you're going to work hard and tomorrow is going to be another day.
Okay, so before we go to Mr. Munoz, you know that you're quoting Scarlett O'Hara, right?
Yes, I am. I realized as I was saying this. I went, oh my God,
so you're clearly steeped in this cultural history.
I am very, I mean, it is my background, and that's kind of
terrific. No, but I want to respond to a little bit of what you said, Lilia, because, you know, through one analysis, one could just say that's like all romanticism. like you're romanticizing the ranch life.
It's hard work.
But you're actually speaking also in a presentist way. You're speaking to, like, it's still hard on the ranch, but we have this sense of hope.
Yeah.
We have this sense of hope. By the way, I went to UT and I think we won a few national championships, but that's another issue.
It's okay.
We can talk about that later.
Yeah, we're ranked number 5 this year.
That's for another day. Mr. Munoz, I have to ask you this because there's somebody on Facebook who wants to know, and this is for you, Mr. Munoz, but if Lilia, you, or Melissa, and Melissa, I don't know if you know the answer to this, but if your father's around, you know, I want him to chime into this because Chris Garcia is asking, hi, Mr. Munoz and all. I would love to know if you, Mr. Munoz, knew my grandpa, Rafael Cienfuegos Garcia, a ranch hand at the Laguna Seca with Raimundo Vela. So that's the question that's being asked. And so, you know, but I wanted to read that because this question seems like a deep question, you know. It's like somebody who's yearning for, does somebody remember my grandpa? You know? And so, Mr. Munoz, I know you left the ranch, you know, when you went off to Korea. And so, you know, you've been back at the ranch intermittently, right? And so perhaps you did not know this person, but maybe you did. Melissa, no. text your father, Melissa, see if he knows of Mr. Rafael Cienfuegos Garcia. Mr. Munoz, so you can respond to that, but also then get into your story, Mr. Munoz. What is that one virtue of growing up in the ranch? And also what Lilia wanted to do was she wanted to pass it off to you. What do you think, Mr. Munoz, of this sense of hope que la gente del rancho siempre tiene. Tienes este sentido de la esperanza.
And in my story is, since my family were workers all their lives, and like I said, when they back many years ago that they started working for the King Ranch. Melissa and Ms. Garcia talking about how distant the ranches were and how isolated. Where within the ranch, my family was one of the unique families from the King Ranch, that we were isolated from any close town. And all my family, all my father's brothers, siblings, were all born in those far away, isolated places in the King Range. And it was in the middle of nowhere. Santa Gertrudis is the hacienda for the King Range, the capital or whatever you want to call it. But we were about 10 miles from there inside the pastures where my family, where my grandfather had and started having his family. And the story of us is that, or that I'm going to bring out to the people, and very few people know this, even my younger cousins and family don't know this. But when my parents were growing, they did not have even a chance to go to school at all. My dad never went to school one day. One day, she never did. And so they didn't know how to speak English. All we learned how to speak Spanish. But it was because of the isolation of where they were working for the ranch. And this is one thing that I want to bring out. And I'm not talking about any other ranch because I never live in any other ranches. I don't know their stories about them. But the owners of the King Ranch confined on my family, which were out. And I can truly say that half of that division, because the King Ranch is composed of 4 divisions, and the division of Santa Gertrudis, which is the largest one, half of that properties, my grandfather was a caporal in a ranch that was called El Ebanito, and my oldest uncle was in Santa Cruz. And those 2 men and their men that work under him, including all their brothers, they took care of those properties like it belonged to them. That's how much they loved working for the ranch. And it was a way of life, a way to bring up the family, be able to feed the family, the thing. But this is a different story than what my 2 co-hosts are saying. And I understand that. They come from the family, they live in the ranch, and they did, and I love their stories. But we had to do that to survive. My family had, in order to survive, to actually put a piece of tortilla on the table. And we never were short of, like even right now, we're going through this virus and people are out there dying of hunger, and we never had to do that. We had plenty to eat. If it wasn't armadillos, it was jabalines, venados, wild turkey, or cattle, because we ate very good. And the thing that, going back to what y'all were talking a few minutes ago, the respect that we had, that we learned through with our people, we respected what we did, we respected each other. There was, nowadays I see the younger people saying, hablando la palabra tú, addressing a person. There was no tú in our language. Anybody that was older than us, and much more our ancestors, tios and all that, they will stand. We were respected. If we were talking about stories, sitting around a campfire or whatever, and one of the elders would ask for water, the youngest one that was there, or we were playing, we were still not in the conversation, we would go and bring the water, come over, give them the glass or the pitcher, and cross our arms and stay there until all of them had drank the water, the elders, and they thank us, and that's the way we did. If we would see our uncles, we could see them every day, and every day we would go to them, say good morning, good afternoon, or whatever, and kiss their hands. And that's the respect that we had. That's the respect we learned to live with. And now I don't see none of that in modern life. So we learned all of that from our ancestors. And one of the things I want to point out more, that my proudest thing that I have learned doing stories of my family, my life, my ancestors, is the DNA, because now I have done the DNA in the last 2 years. And the DNA, for those who haven't done it or don't know what it is, tells you exactly who your ancestors were, or who, it points out the DNA that each one of them has, how much level and all that. But it also tells you what you are. And it tells me that I'm almost 50% Native American. That's the proudest thing that I have ever had told to me. And the reason is because we, the Native Americans, were the first one, our ancestors were the first one in this land. I am part Spanish also and Portuguese, but they're way low. So the proudest part of my blood is being part of this land, being part of this. To me, I just can't express how there's no division, because this land was open for the world. It was open. We don't know what was in 12,000 years ago, 20,000 years ago, how long these people had been here. They taught part of our ancestors when we were growing up, and in some cases, like my mother was born in Oaxaca, possibly around mostly indigenous people. So we learned from them to live off of the land. We didn't have no doctors. We didn't have to see if something was wrong. They knew what herbs were out there, or what plants were out there that they would take and make teas or whatever. And I learned my mothers and my aunts, and when we used to work the kettles and bring meat, they knew what to do and how to save it. There were no refrigerators. I think I was already a older, in my older around 10, 12, when they used to carry a block of ice, went to town and bought it, and that was the way. But they learned to be able to feed us, keep the food where there was not, I don't know, now they put a lot of chemicals in order for food to last. Well, we didn't have to do that. They used to make cheese, they used to make, you name it. But we learned to live from the land, like they were expressing, like Ms. Garcia expressing, that's right. We learned to live with the land, and we learned, even though we were not owners, like I said, even the King Ranch owners, in most cases, did not know what they had in the at least half of Santa Cruz. It was my family that knew and took care of those lands for them. And they trusted them, because that's how my people were incredible, honest people.
Mr. Munoz, thank you very much for your perspective. You know, I am so taken by your, I think, the emphasis that you place on your own indigeneity. I'm taken by that, because you know that part of this story of First Peoples, of Native Americans, you know, has been mostly lost to us. And so if you were able to connect with that through a DNA analysis, and it seems like you had been wanting that kind of proof. So I'm going to ask a quick question here. Melissa, where are you physically right now?
In my kitchen.
You're
Oh, I'm sorry, on the ranch, in San Vicente Ranch.
San Vicente Ranch. Lilia, where are you?
On the ranch, on my dad's Garcia, La Hacienda La Esperanza ranch.
Mr. Munoz, where are you?
My home here in San Antonio.
Mr. Munoz, I see somebody behind you who looks like he's wearing your hat. What is that piece of art behind you? Can you speak to that quickly, Mr. Munoz?
Yes, that picture was Cynthia Order, an artist that painted that for her. It was a picture that my Tio Adan, one of, well, actually he was the chauffeur for Robert Claiborne all his life, since he was 17 years old until Robert died. And then my uncle died some years ago. But that was a picture of him at a roundup. See, when we were young, going back to that picture, the reason I put it out there is kind of so people can see, I'm going to move a little to the side, they can see he was cutting cattle on a roundup. The roundups were done maybe twice a year in the King Ranch, and they would go to different parts of the King Ranch. The potreros, or the sections, were thousands and thousands of acres. So the cowboys would go out there. We're talking about real cowboys, not the cowboys that you see in the movies, not the cowboys that live in town now and dress like cowboys. No, these were the real working cowboys, the people that taught people how to be cowboys. And so we would have roundups, and the cattle were round up by the cowboys, and us younger people, kids, because we were not paid employees, we were part of the package. My father was a worker, so as I grew, I had to do the same work that they did because I was part of the package. And until I was out of school or whatever, then I would go on my own or get off out of the King Ranch or work or whatever. But that was part of us. So when they used to put us around the roundup to keep the cattle from not going, because what the real cowboys wore, they would cut the cattle, because that's where they would they brand them, cut them, vaccinate them, and all that. By the time a calf or one of the calves that were younger ones, by the time they got away from that roundup, they were fully ready to become beef and produce. So that's what the ranch used to do, and that's what we used to help in. That was many other things. I can't tell all because I think we're running out of time. But
well, let me speak to that, Mr. Munoz, because I'm actually monitoring this very closely, and the number of people who are watching now is the strongest after 3 o'clock than it was half an hour ago. So I don't think people mind listening to the stories here. But I want to ask Melissa and Lilia if you want to respond to Mr. Munoz's, last 3-4 minutes here. Lilia, you can go first.
Well, I think he very much hits the nail on the head when you look at the ranch units. My perspective obviously is a little different. I was on the owner side. I was also a girl, and I'm glad Melissa's on here too, because I grew up a bit of a tomboy, wanting to be a cowboy, wanting to be one of the vaqueros. And according to the stories, according to my mom, apparently I had a pair of little chaps and a little cowboy hat that I would use. And they would doll me up with little girly dresses when I guess I was 1 or 2 years old. And I would put on the chaps and the cowboy hat to go to church. And, they would go, well, she's a cowgirl, and I was very proud of that. And I wanted to learn. I remember the roundups that we would have on the old ranch, and the camaraderie and the hard work. And the sweat and the tears and the blood. I mean, there's a whole sense of smell and dirt and everything working in with us. and it's a hard life, a true cowboy. I mean, the real workers. And I laughed when Mr. Munoz said, you know, the real cowboys, not the drugstore cowboys, we would call them, you know, with the steel-toe boots and the, you know, thinking they're all cowboy. But the real cowboys, the real thing. And you realize, I think, growing up on the ranch, that the real thing, you don't, it didn't need to be bragged out. You already knew how to ride the horses, how to rope, how to cattle, how to brand. It was hard work. We had to learn on the ranch. My father only had 2 daughters. We have no sons. So we've had to learn everything on this ranch, how to, I mean, I don't think I do it well, but we've had to learn, you know, fences and horseback ride. I mean, obviously horseback riding, but I mean, riding the fences, working on the fences, working the gates. I mean, it's a nonstop job. And in the past, I do remember, and I'm sure Melissa growing up on the ranch, the workers that you had around you were your family and friends as well, because that was, as a child, that's who you also look up to. That's who was working with you. That's who was teaching you the love of the land. And not only from my grandfather and my father, but from the workers themselves. I would also get the love of the land, the stories, the beauty. I mean, from the horror stories that they would tell you, all the ghost stories, and you would be scared to death to go to bed or to ride your horse in that thicket because things happened there and it was all a joke, to real things, real experiences. I mean, I don't think, one of the things I try to lecture in my classes when we go into the West and we talk about the cattle kingdoms after the Civil War, I do spend a whole lecture talking about South Texas, even though it's U.S. history. I talk about South Texas and I talk about the uniqueness that that cattle industry that became huge really, and I'm kind of exaggerating, but it really started here in South Texas with the vaqueros, with the queñeños, with the cowboys, the people that lived on this land. And like a lot of people don't even realize, the American US John Wayne cowboy, that image comes from Spain, that they brought the cattle, they brought the horses, they brought the know-how, how to brand, how to rope, how to do even the road rodeo comes from this Spanish culture that eventually became Mexican culture, that here in this unique strip that we call, you know, northern Mexico, southern Texas, that vaquero world really is a big part of the culture, the people. And from here, it kind of just spread all over the West. And one of the things that I try to tell my students in lecture is that when this cattle kingdom was going really big, the cattle boom, the best cowboys, the cowboys that people wanted, if they could get them, if they could find them, were the vaqueros, because the vaqueros knew what they were doing. It was just part of who they were. And I think I've digressed a little bit, but I mean, it's all part of this way of life that you still see in South Texas ranches. You still see in the ranch lands. And even when I say nowadays, where are you from? I always say the ranch lands, because I'm from this unique place that you work, you get those blisters on your hands. You, again, I'm hoping for rain. I'm seeing some clouds in the front, in the windows. So I'm hoping you pray for rain. I mean, cattle, it's all part of who you are, and you live off the land. One of the things my mom has often said is, this ranch will be sustainable. If anything were to happen, this ranch is sustainable. You can live off this land.
Hmm.
And that's something that I think touches on all our experiences. You learn to live off the land. You learn to be with the land. And it comes from the indigenous cultures that were before us. It goes from the Spaniards and the Mexicans and the Texans and the US. It's everything combined. And South Texas is just this really unique, this border that, not a border, it's a border land. It just mixes everything. And you get South Texas ranching. I don't know if that answered your question there,
Well,
but
Lily, I want to ask, just a question here, because, you touched on the issue of being a girl,
Yeah.
and growing up in the ranch, because I think, I'm just going to guess here, but I'm thinking that half of the people who grow up in a ranch are female, right? I mean, probably for the laws of probability. So, Melissa, what has that meant to you? How it shapes, a gender identity? And do girls have a fair shot in El Rancho?
It really depends on the family. I remember one time we were out working cattle and I was sitting in the back of the truck and one of the guys roped a calf and the calf jumped up in the truck with me. It jumped up in the cattle in the truck bed. And so there was me, I was probably like 7 years old. And then all of the vaccines and the syringes, and there was like shovels and axes like you usually have in the back of a truck and all this other equipment. And this calf with a rope around its neck, jumping around, and like there was screaming and bawling and men running at. So I would say generally my dad wanted to avoid that because it was such incredible chaos. And not because I was a female, but because, here was this little, I think the ranch crew and my dad are like, oh my gosh, this little girl almost got clobbered by a calf. And so there is kind of this protectionism, which happened in my family, that maybe didn't exist in other families. I have friends that grew up on ranches outside of like Goliad or Houston, and like they were in there working cattle, and if a cow stomped on them, well, so be it. I remember Evelyn East told one story, and I think it was at a museum speaker series many years ago, and she had gone out with her husband, Tom East, and something happened. I think I'd have to ask the family, but that her horse bucked her off and it cut her bottom lip on something, and she just got back up on the horse, and Tom's like, come on, we gotta get the cattle, and so they took off. My family was a little bit more protective of all the girls. So yeah, there are gender differences, but it kind of depends on the family. And that was after speaking to other friends who are female, or grew up on a ranch, like it was different. But I was always very interested in the jobs that nobody paid attention to, which was the kitchen. And like Mr. Munoz was talking about the hierbas, out in the monte, what does it do if you don't have a doctor? So, even though there is a lot of pride, I mean, the cowboys, the males, there's a lot of pride in the work that they do, which is, the blisters, the blood, the sweat, the tears, really, it's a difficult job, but they couldn't do it if there wasn't somebody else that would help with the healing aspect of being that physical person out on the ranch. So it's always teamwork. I mean, my grandmother was always behind the scenes, but that didn't make her less important. It was just a different role. And he couldn't, my grandfather couldn't have functioned without her. So yeah, maybe there's an assumption that if you are kind of behind the scenes and not in the trench, or not, if you're not on horseback and you're not roping a cow, that you're not the important one on the ranch. But Mr. Munoz and Lilia, you all agree that ranching families are a team. Like Mr. Munoz was saying, it's a package deal. Like you are all a team. You're all in on it. And just because you have a different job or a different assignment, it doesn't mean it's a less assignment, because you cannot be a solo rancher. That doesn't happen. So yeah, so that would be my answer.
We're going to begin to wrap up here, and I have a question that I'd like to toss to each of you as a way to close this. So if you can imagine you know, having a group of kids that are going to visit the ranch. And as you prepare to share something with them, you know, these are obviously kids who are going to be consequential in life. What is the one thing you're going to tell them about ranch life that you want them to hold on to forever? You know, and if you would do that in about a minute or so, so this is not a long story. This is just a pithy kind of story that you want to share with children who come out to the ranch to learn about the ranch. So how about Lilia, we start with you, we'll go to Melissa, and Mr. Munoz will wrap up.
Oh
with
my
you.
goodness. Okay, can you repeat that again so I can
So
kind of...
kids come over, right? Puede que sean familiares o puede que sean de una escuela or, you know, or whatever. But they're coming over because they want to learn about how you've lived your life on the ranch. And so, you know, as you prepare for that, you got this one story, this piece of wisdom you're going to impart to them because you want them to remember this forever. You know, what is that you're going to share with them?
I think I would share with them that kind of like what we've all talked about, ranching is a team effort. I would also like them to understand something my grandfather used to say: if you don't like agriculture, whether it's ranching or farming, don't speak with your mouth full. And for them to understand that, you know, the stuff that they have sometimes easy in the cities, it comes from somewhere, and there's somebody that is getting things to them. And so to understand that, and I am very concerned when I see the ranch lands, the workers, the people that own the ranches, things are not as they used to be. There's still some pockets, and I think South Texas is one of them, but I would want to encourage them to understand that agriculture, hard life, but it is a viable option in their lives, and that we all need agriculture, we need ranching and farming, and that it's a dying life out there, but yet it is very essential to everybody. And I would just say, take that love for history or art or whatever you have, and you can see that on the ranch lands, and maybe you want to make it as a viable option in your life, but not as a hobby, as a real way of life, as a productive life. With today's virus, I know ranching and farmers were essential workers, and they should be. And I think that's what I'd like everybody to understand, that from the gardener on the ranch to the owner of the ranch, from the caporal, the foreman on the ranch, to the newbie cowboy, they're all essential, because this way of life is more than, I know I'm the romantic talker over here, but it's more than that. We cannot, as a people, live without agriculture, and to just kind of understand that. And it's hard work, whatever it is. So,
well, hey, listen, you can't be a romantic if you don't like worship Scarlett O'Hara and Red Butler and John Wayne.
Yeah, I can't believe I said all that. Sorry.
That's right. That's right. You probably would have gotten to the movie Giant at some point. And
I probably would have.
So, Melissa, the wisdom that you would impart to children.
I'm going to be very quick, because this is what I say to anybody that comes to my house: watch for snakes.
Yes. Very good.
What do you want? Enjoy everything, but watch for snakes. And if the kids don't learn that lesson when they come visit me, I don't know. Like it's the most essential distillation of my wisdom. Watch for snakes.
Well, you know, on one hand, one could say, you know, that's such a facile story, you know, it's fácil, right? But there's a depth there. I mean, it's almost like metaphor.
Yeah, watch for the metaphorical snake. Like, they're everywhere. But you know, it's true. And we've had city people show up and they're terrified and just like, no, just watch your feet, you know? And, or they think that they can just go walk out into the brush and commune with nature. I'm like, there's no communing. Watch for snakes. That's it. That's all I have to say.
That's terrific. Thank you, Melissa. Mr. Munoz, what's the piece of wisdom you would impart to children, or perhaps that you have imparted to children in your time?
Well, what I usually tell my children, and what I would tell anybody, is that you don't know what life is until you learn the life of a ranch. The ranch produces everything that we buy or sell in the cities or what people do. It's all produced. You have to remember where it's originated from and who are the people that have produced this product, whether it's farming or ranching. One of the stories I want to point out right now, when we were working for the King Ranch, when my family were working for the ranch, if you were a young man, we were ready to be drafted. We all knew that. But if you were working for the King Ranch, you were not drafted. The reason was because it was more important to feed the soldiers the meat that was being produced in the King Ranch and other ranches was more important than you going out to serve. But if you quit the King Ranch, if you would quit the King Ranch at any point, you were immediately drafted. So it was like a defense for people, not because they didn't want to serve. Everybody is proud of have served in one way or the other. But that was something that the ranch tried to keep their workers, so because of what the ranch was producing, the cattle.
Mr. Munoz, that's some good wisdom and some good storytelling. Lilia, thank you so much for your stories, and Melissa, thank you so much for your stories. We really appreciate you being part of this Sunday Speaker Series. Pam is going to come on in a second here to tell you where your friends can go and see a recording of this program, because now this program is documented forever. It's going to be on YouTube. It's going to be on Facebook. It's going to be on our website at the museum. And just in the interest of full disclosure, I want to say that Lilia has also been a board member of the Museum of South Texas History. And so we appreciate your service in that regard, Lilia. So Melissa, thank you so much. Mr. Munoz, thank you so much. And so you all have a good Sunday afternoon, and we look forward to seeing you again. Appreciate your ranching recuerdos.
Thank you.
Pam?
Thank you.
Well, again, thank you to everybody on this presentation. It was definitely a great one. And for those of you who are watching, this presentation is being published on Facebook and YouTube. And again, please continue to follow us on Facebook for the latest information as far as the upcoming Sunday Speaker Series. And actually, Melissa will be returning for a Sunday Speaker Series next month to talk about holiday traditional foods for Fiesta de Nochebuena. That will be Sunday, December 13th. So please, again, keep checking us on Facebook and also the website. And thanks again, and we'll see everybody later.